Imagine waking up every night at the same exact time with no explanation. Picture yourself hearing things, faint whispers, footsteps in the dark, things that should not exist in your quiet, peaceful home. Now, imagine that whatever's hunting you isn't a stranger, but something you've known, something you once loved, something familiar. What happens when the darkness that's following you isn't just a nightmare? When you realize it's not a matter of if, but when it will catch up. Hello everyone, I'm Dusky Nights, and I bring you real-life horror stories that will help you fall asleep. But before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. When you're a child, you forget things. It's a strange kind of forgetting. The mind compartmentalizes and pushes away what it can't make sense of. We all do it. But some things refuse to be buried. They linger like shadows that refuse to leave, waiting for a trigger to bring them back. And then one day, you find yourself back at that same place, emotionally, psychologically, and you realize with bone-chilling clarity exactly what happened. For me, that trigger was a scent, a smell I hadn't smelled in years. It took me right back to my childhood, to a time and place I had buried so deep in my memory that I had convinced myself it was nothing more than a childhood nightmare. But the truth is, I'll never forget the house on the hill. It's been years since I left the countryside of Indiana. I don't know why, but something about that place always felt like a heavy weight on my chest. My parents, my old house, the school, everything. After they both passed, I moved away and never looked back. But recently, after a certain incident, everything came rushing back, so I guess I'll start from the beginning. The summer I turned 12, my family lived alone on a lonely block of streets in the middle of nowhere. Indiana, to be exact. There were no neighbors for miles, just endless fields stretching out in every direction. I grew up in that isolation, and I never really thought much of it. I was an only child, and my parents, well, they were never very interested in having more kids. I think they always saw me as enough. I used to joke with them about how I'd love to have a sibling, but their answer was always the same. You're all we need, kiddo. At first, I didn't mind. I was always pretty good at keeping myself entertained. I spent most of my time drawing, sketching everything I could think of to pass the time. I had a photographic memory, and it was something that amazed both my parents and the people around me. I would often draw from memory, sketching things I had seen only once. I got really good at it, and my parents would show off my drawings to visitors, proudly telling everyone how talented I was. But despite the attention I received for my drawings, there was always something missing. I didn't have any friends, not like the other kids at school, no one to hang out with, no one to talk to. The loneliness gnawed at me, and as I grew older, began to crave more than just the quiet life I had. It was the summer I turned 12 when everything began to change. I had just finished school for the year, and the heat of the summer was suffocating. I remember it vividly. One night in mid-July, the air was thick, and the sound of crickets filled the air. My parents were out at a party with some old friends, leaving me alone in the house for the evening. It was then that I saw it, the house on the hill. I'd heard stories about it from my parents. They'd told me to never, ever go near it. The stories were vague, but the warning was clear. I was never to venture up there. Every time I asked, they would change the subject, brushing it off with half-hearted excuses. The house had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. No one ever went up there. But for some reason, that made me even more curious. I had been sitting in my room, trying to finish a drawing of the field behind our house, when I glanced out the window. The house on the hill stood against the horizon, the faint outline of its jagged roof visible against the twilight sky. The moon was barely visible behind a cloud, but there was something eerie about the way the house loomed in the distance, almost as if it were watching me. A strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't fear, not at first. It was curiosity. And as the minutes ticked by, that curiosity grew into something more intense, more urgent. I could feel the urge to investigate, to see it for myself. What was it about that house that made my parents react so strongly? I tried to shake off the feeling, but I couldn't. It was as if something was pulling me toward it. My heart began to race, and before I knew it, I had grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with a flashlight, a few pencils, and a notebook, and quietly slipped out of the house. The night air was thick, and a cold wind whispered through the trees as I made my way through the yard. The grass felt damp beneath my feet, and I shivered slightly, wishing I had brought a jacket. The world around me was silent, save for the occasional rustle of the wind. The sound of crickets had stopped. It was as though the world had held its breath. I crossed the backyard, moving toward the field. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house on the hill stood like a shadow in the distance, its windows dark, its door barely hanging on its hinges. The closer I got, the more the weight of the place seemed to press down on me. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. As I walked through the tall grass, I heard a sound behind me, a rustling, followed by the faintest of footsteps. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. My breath hitched in my throat, and I forced myself to keep going. I reached the edge of the field, where the tall grass gave way to a small path that led up to the hill. The house loomed above me now, a dark silhouette against the sky. I could see the faint outline of the roof, the weathered stones of the walls, and the broken windows. It looked even more ominous up close. I climbed the path slowly, my footsteps making no sound on the soft earth beneath me. As I reached the top of the hill, I found myself standing in front of the house. It was even more decrepit than I had imagined, the walls covered in ivy and moss, the windows dark and empty. The door, once grand and ornate, now hung open, as if inviting me inside. I hesitated. My parents' warning echoed in my mind. Never go near the house on the hill, but I couldn't turn back now. I stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath me as I crossed the threshold. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the smell of decay. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stepped further into the house, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. I made my way through the first floor, the creaking of the floorboards the only sound in the silence. The furniture was old, covered in dust, and the walls were bare. There was nothing but emptiness, and yet something about it felt wrong. I couldn't explain it, but it was as if the house itself was watching me. I continued to explore, moving cautiously from room to room. I reached a hallway that led to a staircase. I hesitated again, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. At the top, there was a door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. I walked toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard something, soft, almost imperceptible, a whisper coming from inside the room. I froze. It was a voice, low and distant. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then it came again, clearer this time. Get out. I didn't move. Leave now. The voice seemed to come from the shadows of the room. It was not a whisper anymore. It was a command. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. I pushed the door open, and that's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, standing in the shadows, was a figure, tall, thin, draped in tattered clothes. The figure's face was obscured, hidden by shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was paralyzed by fear. The figure took a step forward and I backed away, my body trembling. Get out! The voice came again, but this time it wasn't just a whisper. It was a growl, a low, guttural sound that made my blood run cold. I turned and ran. I didn't care about anything anymore. I just needed to get out. I didn't stop running until I was back at the bottom of the hill, my lungs burning, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I had to get away from that house, from whatever was in it. When I finally got back home, I slammed the door behind me and locked it. I was shaking, my hands trembling as I tried to steady myself. I didn't know what I had seen or what had happened, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never go near that house again. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but when I looked out the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The house on the hill was gone. I've never gone back, and I never will. It's still there. Hopefully, The smell of the countryside was like nothing I'd ever experienced. When I was a kid, it was all I knew. The rustling of the corn stalks, the occasional chirp of crickets, the wind sweeping through the fields. It was peaceful, or at least it used to be. I had lived next to the cornfield for over 13 years now, my whole life, basically. My father had worked the land, and I'd grown accustomed to the endless rows of corn, always swaying in the breeze. It was a lonely place to grow up, and I had always longed for the company of others. My mother left when I was just 2, and my father never really mentioned her after that. I grew up hearing only whispers about her, stories that made her seem like a ghost, like she had never truly been a part of our life. My father never spoke much of her, but I remember him telling me something strange one day when I asked about her. He said, "The land will always be with you, son. It's been here long before we came, and it'll stay long after we're gone." Those words haunted me as I grew older, but what haunted me even more was the strange occurrences I started to witness. It wasn't just the silence that bothered me. It was everything that used to be. Over time, I began to notice something unsettling. The animals that once populated the cornfields, deer, rabbits, raccoons, had all vanished. I hadn't thought much of it at first, figuring it was just a natural cycle. But as the weeks turned to months, I began to question why I hadn't seen a single animal in such a long time. My father noticed it too, though he didn't say anything, but I could tell by the way he spent more time staring out over the fields, the way his eyes narrowed when he walked through the corn, that something was bothering him. Still, he didn't speak a word. He was a man of few words, and even fewer on things that troubled him. Then, one day, something shifted. It wasn't a slow build-up. No, it was sudden, like a light being switched on. It was a hot summer night when it started, the kind of night where the air feels thick, where the crickets chirp loudly enough to drown out your thoughts. I had been drawing in my room, as usual. Drawing was the one thing that kept me grounded, my escape from the loneliness that always felt like it was closing in on me. I had an obsession with details, especially when I drew. I could recall things with incredible clarity, things that others would forget, and I'd recreate them on paper with my colored pencils. It was almost like my drawings were my way of holding on to something. That night, I had been working on a drawing of the cornfield outside, trying to capture the way the moonlight hit the leaves, how it gave the whole place an eerie glow. The breeze outside made the stalks sway gently, making it look like the cornfield itself was breathing. But something changed. I paused halfway through the drawing, feeling like I had forgotten something important. The hairs on my neck stood up, the kind of feeling you get when someone is watching you. I looked up from my sketchbook and stared out my window into the darkness of the field. The rustling had stopped. There was no wind anymore, just complete silence. And then, as if it were responding to my unease, I heard it. "Hello, you." The voice was unmistakable. It was my mother's voice, I froze, my breath catching in my throat. For a second I thought I had imagined it. But then I heard it again, more clearly this time. Look up. I didn't know why I obeyed, but I did. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. At first, it seemed like a person standing at the edge of the cornfield. But the more I looked, the less human it appeared. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, with a dark, swirling mass around its form. It had the silhouette of a person, but there was something wrong with it, something unnatural. It didn't move like a person would. It stood there, perfectly still, as if waiting for me to make a move. The moonlight cast long, grotesque shadows on the ground, but the figure's shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, twisting and slithering in ways I couldn't comprehend. My heart began to race, my mind fighting to make sense of what I was seeing. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I backed away from the window. I grabbed my jacket, but it didn't matter. My hands shook, and I could feel the cold sweat prickling on my skin. Something was calling me. Something in that field. A voice I couldn't ignore. Go to the house on the hill, the voice whispered, and for a moment it sounded like my mother's voice again. I knew I should have listened to the warnings my father gave me when I was younger, the stories he would tell about the house on the hill. Never go there, he would say. Stay away from the house on the hill. But curiosity and fear collided in my chest, and I couldn't ignore the pull I felt. The voice, my mother's voice, it was calling me. I stepped out of my room, cautiously. I didn't want to wake my father, but I also didn't want to be alone. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out the back door, sneaking through the yard toward the cornfield. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something else, something metallic, as if the land itself was bleeding. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as I approached the edge of the field. The moonlight cast long, eerie shadows, and the field stretched endlessly before me. The wind started again, rustling the leaves, and I shivered. I stepped forward, crossing the line from the known into the unknown, as the whispers of the wind seemed to follow me. The closer I got to the house, the more I could feel it, the presence. It was watching me, waiting. The house on the hill stood in front of me, its dark silhouette rising up against the night sky. The windows were dark, lifeless, and the house seemed to sag under the weight of its own history. But it wasn't the house itself that made my skin crawl. It was the fact that I knew I was not alone. I stepped up onto the porch, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open without hesitation. The door creaked like it hadn't been opened in years. The smell inside was musty, stale, like the house had been abandoned for a long time. I didn't know what I expected, but when I stepped inside, everything felt wrong. The air was thick, like I was walking through something oppressive. And then I heard it, the voice. Welcome home. I spun around, but there was no one there. No one to greet me. no one to explain why the air had suddenly grown colder. I turned toward the staircase, and that's when I saw it. A shadow standing at the top of the stairs, watching me. My breath caught in my throat as the figure stepped down into the faint light. It wasn't human, not anymore. Its body was twisted, unnaturally long, its eyes too large, too dark, reflecting the dim light in an almost hypnotic way. It moved toward me slowly, its limbs clicking as it walked. The house seemed to echo with the sound of its steps, but the air around me was dead silent. I froze, unable to move, unable to scream. My mind raced, but my body wouldn't respond. I could feel the darkness closing in on me. The figure spoke, its voice rasping as if it had not spoken in years. "I've been waiting for you." The words hung in the air, thick with malice, before the creature reached out toward me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I felt my pulse quicken as it reached for my neck, and just as its cold fingers touched my skin, everything went black. Days passed. I awoke in my bed, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. I sat up quickly, looking around. My room was exactly the way I left it. My flashlight was beside me, my jacket on the chair by the door, but my heart kept racing. I couldn't breathe. I could still feel it, the weight of that thing in the house, still pressing on me, like it was waiting for me to go back. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. I had to leave. I grabbed my things, my notebook still tucked in my bag, and headed downstairs. My father was waiting for me by the door, looking concerned. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just grabbed my bag and walked out of the house, not looking back, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was out there, whatever was in that house, wasn't done with me yet. It would follow me, no matter where I went, and someday it would come back for me. If you've ever experienced something you can't explain, or if you're intrigued by the idea that the past may follow us in ways we can't understand, leave your thoughts in the comments below. I need to know if I'm alone in this, or if there's more to this eerie experience waiting to unfold. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest stories, because the things that live in the dark might be watching, waiting, and they might be closer than you think. If you have any personal experiences or need someone to talk to, feel free to reach out to me at duskynights145@gmail.com. Let's share our stories together